Welcome to Beyond the Prescription, my unscripted, unedited, free-form podcast. Today, we have the special privilege of having Benoit Denizet-Lewis on here. Benoit is one of the longest tenured contributing writers to the New York Times Magazine. He's a New York Times bestselling author, professor at Emerson College, New America Fellow, NEH Public Scholar who lives between Boston and Prague, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's got a new book out. It's called, ta-da! You've Changed: The Promise and Price of Self-Transformation. It's a 6-year exploration of how people actually transform. And the reason I'm interested in this, Benoit, and the reason I wanted to talk to you and grab you on a Saturday morning is because, as I said to you before we started, prescribing Lipitor and telling people to count their protein grams is interesting. But what's more interesting to me as a physician is people's interiority,
Right.
how their thoughts and feelings and behaviors shape who they are, how they show up in the doctor's office, because it's often the invisible data that is more relevant to people's health and medical outcomes than the things we can measure in a lab test. So with that intro, thank you for joining me, and let's go.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited. I'm glad to be talking to you.
Let's talk about why you wrote this book.
Yeah.
You have a personal through line here, but let's talk about what interests you about the concept of self-transformation. I mean, we live in this era of before and after photos on the cover of People magazine, like she lost 100 pounds, like Instagram glow ups, like that's like sort of why is self-transformation so interesting to people, and why is it interesting to you?
So there's a lot of books. I mean, we live in this era of like optimization, right? And we
Right.
wear all these things on I don't, but a lot of people wear all this stuff on their arms to tell them how they're doing. There's a lot of great books out there about habit change, behavioral change. All that stuff is super important, super relevant to transformation. I was interested in I would say deeper transformations that made people have a new perspective or take on a new identity or feel sort of radically changed or transformed in some way, whether that was about their spiritual beliefs, if they felt their personality had shifted, their politics, gender. I was interested in what it feels like to feel changed. And at the same time, I was also interested in the way that you and me and everyone else judges other people's transformations, right? Whether we say, oh, that sounds legitimate, that sounds real, I believe that, or in the ways that we like celebrate each other's transformations. I think we have this idea that that self-transformation is this kind of inner thing that we experience. And in reality, we live in community. We are around other people. And so the getting buy-in from other people about our transformations and our changes is really, really important. So, I went broad, everything from like a terrible bully who turned into a Buddhist to an octogenarian woman who's trying to have she's got a few years left and she's like, my personality is not ideal. And it is pushing me away from people I care about and people I love. And so she's trying to change her personality late in life, to political identity changers, to people who change their faith, gain their faith, lose their faith, all kinds of changes.
Yeah, I love the people that you study in this book and that you follow, and like the gender transformations, the people who went from, one political ideology to another.
Mm-hmm.
You got to read the book to understand the whole thing. But let me ask you this: what is it, if anything, that you saw as the sort of, common denominator reason people try to affect change? Right, like sometimes you don't need to change, right?
Right.
Sometimes you don't want to change. Sometimes you don't know how to change. Like, what is it that for these people, what is it that like drove change? Was it out of necessity? Was it fear? Was it other people being mad at them? Was it their own internal
I think
querying?
it's a combination of all of those things.
Yeah.
I think we change because sometimes we don't plan to change. And sometimes we're walking through the forest and we have an epiphany or we have a moment of awe. Most of us have these moments that feel transcendent or transformative in some way. It can be a big thing if we're on psychedelics. It can be a smaller thing if we're walking through the park. So sometimes change happens to us, right? When we're not expecting it. So I was really interested in that aspect. Like, what do we do in sort of these moments? And I write about a few of them that I've had in my life, these moments that feel transformative. Um, Other times we're changing, there's this idea that we have to change for ourselves. And that's wonderful. And it's great when we have sort of a goal. Like I had the goal that I wanted to be a much better friend. I set that goal. I was like, I am really not great in my relationships. I am too guarded. I am not vulnerable enough. There's all these ways that I want to be in better relationship with people that I care about and my family and friends. And I set that as a goal. And I recently asked all my friends, like, do you think I've changed in this way? Which was an awkward conversation, but they're like, yes, actually you have like become less guarded and more vulnerable. And that was like, so that's a way that I changed. And then there's the mysterious ways. I've just turned into my father. Like, I mean, the ways that we also just become our parents. We change in mysterious ways. You probably know this, but medication, illness, these things can shift our personalities. Just aging changes us in ways that are sort of mysterious. So there's this way that we're both driving the bus of our transformation, and then we're like a passenger on the bus. And it's sort of it's this. I love the mysteriousness of change. I find that so fascinating. And that's what this book is really about. Like, obviously, there are methods that we can use, but this is also deeply mysterious
Yeah.
why we change the way that we do. And I sort of love that mysteriousness. I don't know if everyone will, but I love it. I just think it is absolutely fascinating to sort of go around in there. And then there are people who I spend time with parolees who literally, to be able to gain their freedom. So this is an example of like, I'm changing because I need to change to be able to get back out in the world. And those men and the stories they tell are fascinating.
So as someone who's helping people affect behavioral change in my role as a physician,
Yeah.
and by the way, I'm a person too who's also thinking about the things you're thinking about, like how to change various elements of myself to like lean into the good parts and turn the volume down on those sort of not so healthy parts.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is helping people sort of do, understand exactly what you're describing, which is like where there's agency over change, like
Yeah.
where you can change. Like, let's think about the serenity prayer, like
Yeah.
the wisdom to know
Yeah.
where things are fixed and immutable,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
your genetic predisposition to disease or your something that happened to you, right?
Yeah.
Like something like you can rage about that, you can be upset about it, and you can organize a sort of thought, feeling, behavioral pattern around that experience you had, but that isn't changing.
Right.
And then helping people understand like that is fixed, but how you relate to it, how you, have relationships with other people
Yeah.
in response to it,
Yeah.
is dynamic and up to you. So I think, like,
Yeah.
talk to me about the people who, in your book, sought guidance on their pathway to change. And maybe I want to ask you about you, Benoit. Like, you are very vulnerable in this book, and you talk about yourself. Like,
Yeah.
talk to me about the sort of being your own guide and trying to navigate what is immutable and what is dynamic, and
Yeah.
then asking other people to be a mirror to
Yeah.
decide what is changeable and what is dynamic.
Yeah, and it's so interesting when you talk to people about change. Sometimes we create this sense like that people either believe that change is possible, so people are either on team people can change, or you talk to other people and they're like, people don't really change, right? We have these very strong feelings, and in reality, I think we're both on both teams. I think there's ways in which, and we're deeply conflicted about change. We want to change, and we're really terrified of change. And therapists see this often. They say, clients come in saying they really want to change, and what they actually want to do is just get better at their neuroses or something. They don't actually want to change. So I think we have we're deeply conflicted in the ways that we want to change and in the ways we want other people to change. My husband, I don't want him to change significantly, right? Because I fell in love with the person I fell in love with. Now, there's things I'd like for him to change, maybe, but and so we're also really terrified. If you're my friend and you change in some way that can be really threatening to me. So change, we have all these mixed feelings about it. This question of like what we can control and what we can't is so complicated. And many of the people that I met were really struggling with this. Whether it was, even trying to figure out what works. So I wrote about a young woman. She transitioned gender wise, but it also was combined with like wanting to be a better person. And, she sort of and she did some psychedelics and she also did some therapy. All of this was mixed together, right? And so it's like, well, what caused the positive shift? She's in a much better place in her life. What was the magic formula that sort of made this work? And it's all very confusing and it's unclear. For me, I think what's really interesting, what I found over and over again, even with people who had big shifts with their spiritual beliefs, their politics, I think what's mostly immutable, and I say this, and I want to be really careful how I say this. I think that personality, our core personalities, if we work hard on them, can shift a little bit. I don't think that there's this whole cottage industry now saying you can change your personality. Like, I am a little skeptical of that. I think that we can definitely tweak our personality. And if we're high in neuroticism, we can work and there's all kinds of methods to sort of lower that, or we want to be a little bit more extroverted. It's just rare to see someone, even people who go through dramatic identity shifts or they take on a new spiritual belief. People will say, they're kind of the same person. They're maybe saying the opposite thing, if they went from left to right politically or spiritual to atheist or whatever it is. So they have a fundamentally different view of the world, which in itself is fascinating. I mean, that completely can shift one's life to be, I'm devoted to this new thing, right? At the same time, their core personality usually doesn't transform all that much. So it's a great question, like what we can control. I have my genetics, I have my childhood stuff, but even that, my childhood stuff with my mom, a little bit with my dad, that has been transformed through years of therapy and through watching both of them change and being able to connect with them. So I'm at a place now with both my parents, and I feel so fortunate about this, where they're the closest people in my life next to my husband and my very close friends. And that relationship has been repaired. So even trauma can be transformed and can be repaired. And I think that's important to know. So there's these things that we can repair. But then again, I'm just becoming my dad, I mean, he's a writer interested in change. I mean, the list is very long about the ways that I'm like my dad. So, how much am I driving the bus? I don't know.
How much do you think, like, I'm super interested in prescribing, if you will, patients who are trying to affect change, self-compassion, forgiveness,
Yeah.
an apology with a period to someone else, like an apology that ends with a period. I'm not good at this. I will say to my husband, so sorry, I was an asshole, but it's because I was really stressed out. And he's like,
Right.
like, no, so sorry. Like, apology with a period, self-compassion, forgiveness, and forgiveness of others. Like, I'm not great at that. I'm like defended like everybody else. I'm like, think I'm right a lot of the times.
Yeah.
And I come from a family of like non-wallflowers.
Yeah.
And so how much do you think these sort of like, not just saying you forgive somebody or saying you have compassion for yourself, but actually having a feeling of self-compassion is important for change?
I mean, it's so important. I mean, I almost got goosebumps as you were talking about that, because for me, the self-compassion and the gentleness has been the transformation.
Yeah.
So that has been the transformation. And that has allowed me, like, I didn't realize it with my current therapist who I've been working with for 7 years. I didn't realize the first 2 years with her was, I mean, she didn't really tell me this, but it was all about shame reduction and learning to sort of accept all parts of myself and have compassion for all parts of myself. And that has been transformative. And I think of Ram Dass, who has this quote where he says, you know, so he's always been he can be very jealous, right? And so he says the change is that he's not pushing away his jealousy. When he feels jealous, he has this great quote. He goes, "Oh, jealousy, you little schmoo, come here. Of course you feel jealous." And that just changes it. It's like, of course you feel jealous. And so not only are you sort of welcoming it in and sort of like, but you're putting it in its place and you're saying, of course you feel jealous. Like, that's totally fine. We're not going to let it run us today, but of course you feel jealous. That both softens it. It also it brings it as part of you, but it's also separate. You're like, oh, there's my jealousy. And so to be able to do that and the self-compassion, the gentleness has been the transformation. Part of that, I think, is being able to really observe oneself. My dad, who's a breathwork teacher and talks about honest self-observation as being so critical to change. And there's all kinds of ways that we can do that, all kinds of techniques that we don't need to talk about, but being able to sort of look at oneself honestly can be very hard too at the beginning. So you sort of need it with this compassion. Then this thing that you said, I mean, I'm always joking with my husband because he's like, okay, I'm sorry, but last week you did. And I'm just like, like, what are we doing here? Like, these apologies, it's the hardest thing. You do learn them in the 12 steps when you have to make amends, where you have to apologize and there's that little part of you that's like, oh, I hope they apologize back for their part. But you have to sort of work beyond that. And the apology has to be, I'm sorry. And there needs to be no expectation of what they're going to say. And if you can do an apology like that, then you're doing it pretty right. I mean,
And also, Benoit, if I may,
yeah,
add, is an apology that is not predicated on them apologizing back, an
yeah,
apology that ends with a period, that isn't like, so sorry, but I was pissed off at you for this reason. And also an apology that it is authentic and not saying, I'm sorry you felt this way. Like,
right,
I've
right,
learned the hard way, right? I have 3 young adult children. Like, you don't say, I'm sorry you felt upset by my doing X. No,
right,
no, I'm not. It is not on me to apologize for their feelings. I have to apologize for me, me,
right,
me, 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 with a
right,
period, full stop.
yeah,
And that takes some um, internal shivering of like, what's going to happen when this happens? Am I going to be there? Right? Like it's humility, right? Like it's humility. It is
right,
radical honesty, and it is sitting with the discomfort of like, you did something wrong.
right.
And then you have to bring in that self-compassion of like, but I'm okay, and I'm like, I'm not a bad person. And then it's amazing what that does though when you apologize authentically, and it's good for the apologizer, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's like
yeah,
there's a bodily feeling
yeah.
that's
And
positive.
it's interesting in the concept of change too, because there's a way in which we we're parsing apologies often in the public, right? Like celebrities who do things wrong. We're parsing we're really good at parsing apologies, and it's seen, rightly so, as a really important part. Have they changed? Is the apology, does it feel real? And this becomes fascinating. I mean, I mentioned earlier writing about murderers who had to convince parole boards that they were transformed. And part of that was an apology. I mean, it's a very complicated thing. But what I found so fascinating is some of these men in California prisons, in some California prisons, you can basically work on yourself all day long. There's therapy, there's workshops. And one guy wrote, when he was paroled, he was truly transformed after decades. And came out, he said, man, if I could find people in the real world who were as introspective as the guys that I was hanging out with in prison, who were doing the work, which was just like a hilarious sort of idea that, but we're all, they have to convince parole boards. And in many ways, we have to convince not only our friends and our families in many cases, but if often we have to convince sort of the world via social media that we are transformed or that our new identity is real. And so sometimes that involves an apology, and sometimes it just involves a kind of performance of transformation, which, I mean, and it also makes all of us suspicious because whenever something happens on social media, there's always a performative aspect. So figuring out, have they changed? Is this genuine? Are they real? All of that is really complicated to figure out for us.
Let's talk about shame as this sort of kind of final common pathway for so many people's
Yeah.
um being stuck, right? Like shame is, as Brene Brown calls it, shame is different from guilt. Guilt is I did something bad.
Yeah.
Shame is I am bad. And I
Yeah.
think we all have shame, right? Shame is part of being human. I think there's some people, particularly maybe in the White House, who don't have shame. Not to indicate my politics, but like shamelessness
Yeah.
is a sign of narcissistic personality or
Right.
right, like, that's like, shame is part of being alive or who we are. Um,
Yeah.
Shame, though, is a noxious emotion when it's driving the bus, when it's the front seat,
It's
and so
devastating. Yeah.
and so many like, when as a physician, I see people coming in all the time, their relationship with food, their relationship with alcohol, their relationship with other people is harming them, harming others to
Yeah.
various degrees, and it stems from this shame. So, to what extent do you think shame plays a role in people not changing?
Absolutely.
And to what extent do you think shame, when it's kind of when we shine a light on shame and acknowledge it, is what moves the ball forward?
Well, there's shame in all kinds of ways. So there's the shame of failing to change.
Right.
And we don't talk about that a lot. People try to change over and over again, New Year's resolutions, try to quit our addictions, try to stop smoking, try to eat better, try to do all these things. And there's a way in which that there's a shame of failure to change, which we
Mm.
don't talk about nearly enough. And it causes a lot of people to just say, well, screw it, I'm going to give up and I'm not going to try to change. So there's that failure of trying to change. There's there's that deep shame. I'm going to talk once more about these parolees because when they came to the board and let's say, so Lucy, let's say you've done something to me and you really hurt me. And I can look at you, and if you seem like you have a lot of shame about it, that could be satisfying to me. I'm like, oh, Lucy really, like, she gets how much she just hurt me in this way. Actually, if a parolee comes in front of the parole board still racked with shame, that's a terrible sign because
Mm.
they need to have worked through that shame. Because if they go back out in the world still carrying all of that shame, they're much more likely to reoffend. There was an evidence showing
So
that
interesting.
yeah, that young people who were in who like committed a crime, if they had guilt, they were like, yeah, that was great. That was a great sign. If they had shame, racked with shame, they were much more likely to reoffend. So shame, while it can be very satisfying for me to look at you and see you racked with shame, it's actually not a great predictor of you changing. And shame in my own story was so incredibly important. I had shame about failing to change in my addiction and to get better that way. I had shame about just not living ethically the way I wanted to. And I had shame about failing with my friendships, and I had shame in relationships, and I had so much shame. And as I said, my therapist, 2 years, I'm like, what did we work on those first 2 years? And she goes, shame reduction. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's what we did. And so there's a tremendous amount of shame among people who both want to change, but then there's a way in which shame can really block us from changing as well. And then the shame of what are other people going to think? There's an added shame if other people don't believe us, right? If we're changing in some way and other people are saying, well, that's not real, or you're just going to change back, or you're unsure. Connected to this, I just want to briefly talk about doubt.
Mm.
Doubt is we look at that as like, well, if you're doubting your change, maybe it's not right. Like you don't seem sure that you can do this, or all of that kind of stuff. Or doubt can be can be used politically by the other side to say, well, your new identity is not really real. It seems like you're doubting it. Doubt is everywhere in change. And I think we have to make space, and I'm sure you do as a physician, like, oh yeah, like you want to do this change and you're doubting that you can do it. That's totally normal, right? That's a human thing. Like, let's work with the doubt. And I just think we need to talk about doubt because oftentimes in our stories about how we change, we're like, oh yeah, and then I just knew that I had to do this and I just went for it. And in reality, there's an incredible amount of doubt that's not discussed often enough.
I think it's such a good point. Doubt is like the first cousin of shame, right? They're sort of intrinsic human emotions, and I think what you're describing, Benoit, is like putting a distance between the feeling and you,
Right.
right? Like putting a space between the feeling and you, so that you can look at it and practice radical honesty and understand for you to what extent is this emotion like just making me a humble person, making me a good person. Like
Yeah.
shame is part of being alive, and to what extent is it like hindering my ability to move forward?
Yeah.
I think one of the more um, you know one of the more interesting questions I will ask patients in my office, once we've established rapport, I don't ask this in like a new patient intake,
Right.
is like, what's the one thing you're afraid to tell me or embarrassed to say out loud about something you're worried about health wise? And it's so disarming, and people are so glad to be asked
Hmm.
because they're like, like I've had men in their 50s and 60s say like, I'm gay and
Mm.
I'm in a heterosexual relationship. I've had people
Mm.
say to me like on the sexual front, like I haven't had sex with my husband in 20 years and I'm ashamed about it. We don't talk about it. And
Wow.
or, I like the things that people are harboring inside and the things that
Um,
are not spoken, the things that they can't tell anybody else, they can't even say it to themselves. That is where that's the money question, right? That's the
yeah.
action, because it's not that I'm a therapist. I'm not I mean, I kind of play one on TV.
Hmm.
It's more that I can shine a light on it, help people name what's going on, normalize it. Like, dude,
Right.
welcome to the club of humanity. Like, we all have secrets. We all have shame.
Right.
The key is naming it, and then let's figure out what we're gonna do about it, if you wanna do something about it, because,
Right.
you know, if you're just living in that shame cycle of, like and then your behaviors are organized around it, it's really difficult to affect change.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Benoit, I wanna ask you about you.
Yeah.
Like, you're such an interesting character. Like, I wanted to grab you because I think your book is awesome, and everybody needs to buy it. It's called You've Changed. Here it is. It's backwards probably, but tell me about you. Like talk about your change, your self-transformation, like,
Yeah.
and how change in your life affected you, like, emotionally, physically, and other people, because it's not just about you
Yeah.
for you.
Yeah. I think, like I wrote a book about addiction many years ago. And with that book too, I was like, oh, I'm just going to be writing about other people. And then I end up writing about myself, partially too. So, and that happened with this book. So, I, yeah, so I grew up, really compartmentalized, disconnected from my feelings. Um, had a kind of tumultuous sort of upbringing in some ways emotionally with my parents, and felt like I couldn't, for whatever reason, whoever's fault it is, felt like I couldn't reveal myself. I couldn't. There was no one that I could be like, oh, I'm like not doing well, or I'm scared, or I had all of that was internalized, and so I then uh I came out as gay. I realized I was gay. It was a moment of epiphany, actually. I write about it in the book, in my early 20s. That, sort of felt a little bit more comfortable in my skin. Uh, but then fairly quickly, my sexual behavior became compulsive, and we call it sex addiction, sexual compulsivity, whatever you want to call it. Um, it and I'm not like anti-sex. I think sex is great. I think people can have a lot of sex and it's wonderful. For me, it started to really interfere with my relationships, my work, my friendships. It just sort of took over in a way that was really scary and confusing. Um, and so I went to 12-step recovery for that. I did a lot of work on that. Um, and I struggled. And I went to treatment, and all the while I'm sort of having this career as a magazine writer, and fairly successful, a kind of but like very ego based. I was like very dependent on what random strangers sort of thought of me, although I could sort of care less what like people close to me thought of me, and I was sort of looking for validation outside, which was very strange. Anyway, so all of that, um, I wrote a book about addiction, was honest about my struggles in there, sort of moved forward, wrote a book about dogs. I drove around the country with my dog, who I was worried didn't like me very much. And and that was fun. That was kind of a break. Still kind of struggling to be connected and to be present in life. Then I started this book in 2019, and I I just turned 50, and I was at a place where I was really ready to do some hard work, and to you know do some forgiveness work, connect more with the people in my life. I also met my husband around this time. I think it's really critical how other people can help us transform sort of his radical acceptance of me. And I don't know if I don't think it's intentional. He's just a very like positive person, but it's just his radical acceptance of me combined with the radical acceptance of my therapist and with some friends has been transformative, I think. And so thinking about the ways that the people close to us do impact us. And I attended this How We Change It, Why We Don't thing at Esalen, which is this retreat center out in California. And the woman was like, we have to create the conditions in our lives where change can happen. We're so focused on like, I need to change this immediately. Like we're beating ourselves up to change. And she's like, no, we need to stop doing that. And we need to think about what are the conditions. Where do I live? What kind of work do I do? Who do I surround myself with? What are the conditions that are going to, without me worrying about desperately trying to change, what are the conditions that are just going to sort of help me change without, beating myself up and being obsessed with metrics all the time and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what I've tried to do, I think, is sort of create the conditions in my life where I'm most likely to continue to grow.
It's
Yeah,
amazing. I mean, to what extent was writing about yourself publicly and like a part of your like radical honesty and radical like because that's pretty. I mean, a lot of people who've been through what you have been through, Benoit, are are like not willing to talk about it with other people. I mean, it's like to what extent was writing like coming out with this story? It's very personal,
yeah.
important for your kind of transformation.
And actually, so when I did this for my addiction book, I wrote about my sex addiction, and I did it too young, and I actually
Mm,
really, I thought it was going to be fine. I really did. I was like, I can handle this. And I don't think I handled it very well. I
mhm.
think it was really destabilizing. I'm in a place now where I feel much better about what I wrote about in this book, but there is a way in which people say, oh, you're so vulnerable. And I did share a lot in this book, but there's also stuff that I keep to myself.
Well,
And
I
I
hope so.
think,
I hope so, right?
yeah.
Because
But I've only learned that later. Like the reader is not entitled to my entire life. Like there are things that I can keep to myself, and
yeah,
figuring out what is the balance between I want to be honest and I want to be vulnerable and I want to be real, and I don't want to mislead. So there's no misleading. I'm not misleading. I'm being honest and vulnerable. At the same time, there are things that are for me,
That's right.
yeah. And so
That's
that
right.
that mix, yeah,
That's right, and that's healthy, right? There's a difference between being defended and not being honest about something, and just being like,
right,
having a life that isn't public, right?
yeah.
I wonder. This is like a sidebar question, but do you know my friend Scott Stossel, who's the national editor for the Atlantic?
I don't know him, but I know
Oh,
of him. Yeah,
oh my gosh, you remind me of Scott in some ways. Scott is a lovely human being, beautiful writer, and he wrote a book, New York Times bestseller, called My Age of Anxiety,
yeah,
where he went deep on his, like, the minute to minute kind of grueling interiority of his experience of anxiety, and, I think it was helpful for him, but it was also very vulnerable. Anyway, he's just
yeah.
an interesting figure and a good friend. But anyway,
Anxiety really interests me. I wrote a New York Times Magazine cover story like 10 years ago, 8 years ago, about severely anxious young people. And what I love about anxiety is it's actually, if it's treated right, we can do a lot with anxiety. Like anxiety can be like, no, I mean, not fixed for everybody. People can really work with their anxiety. Exposure therapy, medication, the combination is truly incredible. But we're seeing so much more anxiety among young people, obviously, and trying to figure out. I'm a professor and I see that every day now more and more. And it can become very, but there's signs of hope. Like the young people are leading the way with like getting rid of their phones. There's a whole movement in the last 6 months that feels like a shift going on around like technology and being like, oh my God, my phones are like crack cocaine and I need to figure out a way to do something about it. So
yes.
we'll see where it ends up. But there's a little movement right now among young people that is exciting in that.
Yeah, I think understanding that anxiety can be your rocket fuel, and it's motivating. It gets you to pay your taxes on time and turn in your
Yeah.
term paper. It also can be noxious, and debilitating.
Yeah.
So finding that line, like calibrating anxiety to the degree of actual threat, is like, actually, in my
Yeah.
world, is key, right? People have access to like their MRI reports and lab results, and they're like up all night on ChatGPT.
Right.
And it's not that you can't be anxious about something that's flagged red, but
Yeah.
let's calibrate it to the actual fact of what's going on. But
Right.
that's the nature of anxiety. That's like lifelong work, right? Is like,
Yeah.
as you've described, self-compassion, forgiveness, um, awareness of self,
Yeah.
as like almost independent from the experience of self every single second of the day.
Right.
And then understanding where you have agency and where you have to let go. I mean, that is just like, I think we'll all be doing that. I mean, I think to the extent that you're curious about those things, we'll be doing this until we die, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like doing all this work is sort of endless, and it's exciting, and trying to figure out what works. Right. For some people, certain kinds of therapy work. For some people, meditation works. For some people, psychedelics work, but not for everybody. There's a whole, psychedelics create all kinds of potential problems too. And so, and there's the fear when people take psychedelics, like, what is it? There's this fear that people have. Am something going to be revealed to me that I'm going to have to change everything? And then what if that's revealed to me and then I choose not to listen to it? Psychedelics are very scary for a lot of people. And but they can also be a transformative tool. So meditation, breath work, whatever it is, therapy, finding the things that work for you. And then figuring out, like, there's this idea, we've been arguing about it since the 70s, about like how much internal focus is too much versus paying attention to the world. And I find that fascinating. And the whole last chapter of the book is be the change question mark. Many people think it was Gandhi that said, be the change you want to see in the world. And it was actually this woman, Arlene Lawrence in Arizona, who's in her 80s, who I went to visit. And this question of like, what do we do in this really strange, surreal, scary time we live in? I cannot overstate how anxious people are right now, and how lonely and depressed and anxious. And so what do we do? How do we, how do we, how do we like make sense. Our brains were not designed to take in all of the bad news of the entire planet, but that's what we're doing. And so, how do I create a way in which I'm both engaged with the world and also looking inward? And what is the balance of that? I find really fascinating because people are struggling with that. They're like, well, and if I'm too focused on myself, then I'm just being selfish. There's a lot of ideas about like what the right mix is, and people are struggling to figure it out.
Yep. I think
Yeah,
you're right. And I think we are trying to push a boulder up a mountain um, when we are trying to like sort of calibrate our relationship with technology and information. Like
yeah,
it's just work, right? To have distance from all the information that's coming at us. The
yeah,
fact that you can do things so much faster and quicker and that you have to process so much information is like it's work. I mean, it's
yeah.
its own project, right?
Yeah. And
Especially
we can become paralyzed. I mean, my students are like, if I read the news first thing in the morning and I read all of it, my day's ruined. And so like,
right,
what do they do to like not have their day ruined? And is that selfish to like worry about not having your day ruined? I don't think so. But like, there's a lot of internal shame around that. Am I just blocking out the world? And, I don't
right.
know.
I mean,
Yeah.
being human is hard. I mean, being human is exquisitely vulnerable. I think it requires self reflection. It requires
Yeah.
honesty, as you've described, Benoit. It requires holding up a mirror to yourself. It also requires like being in community and asking other people to like reflect back and then just like being and trusting our intuition. I think modern life uh, too easily wants us to outsource our intuition to like checklists and other people's sort of protocols and prescriptions. I
Yeah.
don't even mean in the medical space. I just mean in general. Like,
Yeah.
oh, what are they doing? What like the shoulds and the sort of. I think that we run the risk in modern life of outsourcing our intuition to other people.
Absolutely.
And sometimes our intuition isn't right, but it does exist.
Yeah.
And so to the extent you can be in nature and sort of let your mind wander and sort of, let a thought come to its natural conclusion without it being interrupted by a notification on your phone.
Right.
I think that is healthy. I try to do that in my own life. It's difficult. I'm sure like you, I have a million things coming at me all the time, but I think to the extent I can like, notice the birds chirping or look at my cat and think about how ridiculous he is and it just those things are just or just like my best ideas for writing come when I'm just still and quiet or I'm
Right.
on a walk. I mean,
Right.
I will be like, "Aha, ooh, yeah. That's
Yeah. For
it's
me,
not what I'm reading about someone else's like, sort of like what I did to get ready this morning post, right?"
we leave so little space, and I struggle with this as a writer. We leave so little space for like things to pop in. If I'm on my
Yes.
phone all the time, I mean, this is a big thing that I'm working on. Is like putting my phone in another room for half an hour or an hour or whatever can feel sort of manageable. And I get great ideas when I'm in the shower. So I recommend taking showers if you're a writer, you're trying to figure out structure. Like ideas come to me when I'm not on technology. And I'll be really honest, a big goal for me, and I'm not the first person to do this, is like, how do I live with this technology and this
I
phone?
mean,
And it's and
Benoit,
it
you and I could be accountability partners because this is my biggest thing. Like like everybody has this like compulsion. Like I'm a very
yeah,
compulsive person. Like
yeah,
I'm obsessive compulsive, like whatever. Like we all have degrees of that,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
for me, the biggest challenge is my phone
yeah,
and screens. And I'm promoting my own book. And I'm interested in what people say back on my Substack posts. And it's like
yeah.
it's a constant battle. So yeah,
I mean, it's right now, it's what I'm working on primarily, actually.
good for you.
And I don't know if I'm winning. I mean, you know, it's it's the little battles. Can I put my phone away for half an hour? And but yeah, like my husband is much better at that. He I don't know why. I mean, it's probably his personality. He's just
Yeah,
much better at it. He is just it's easier for him. I mean, he'll have his scrolling time, but then it's like that's over. And now he's on to the next thing, which
he's
is how
he's
you want to do it.
I'm sure he has flaws, but he's self-regulated in that department. My husband's the
Yeah.
same way. He's annoying at night. He's reading like War and Peace and like or like, foreign affairs or something erudite, and I'm like looking at, Kim Kardashian's latest sort of like release of her like,
Right.
body shapewear, and I'm like, oh my god, what? And then he goes to bed and he wakes up early with a smile, and I'm like, God, so annoying. Like, why are you? I mean, he has other flaws, and
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's like, why can't I do that? I go to bed. It's like my little treat time. He goes to bed, and then I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, ooh, I get to
Yeah.
kind of scroll and look at stupid crap, and then
Yeah.
I do it all over again the next day.
Well, and I think the question is, so there's the question of like, what are we not allowing a kind of mystery, or for me, it might be story ideas or my imagination. So there's that, right? Like, what am I blocking out? The phone is actually also, when we think about anxiety, it is the first place that we go to soothe ourselves with anxiety. And I saw it with young people. I mean, it causes
100%.
anxiety, but like young people were like, the minute, and I talk about this with my students, the minute they feel anxious, and I notice this, if I'm at a party and I hate small talk, I just, my instinct is to go for the phone, right? It is a way to sort of, we can control what's happening on our device, and we can't control other people out in the real world at a terrible cocktail party. So, there is that thing. So there's that, but then there's also the ways in which, you know, I think so many young people are trying to be like, well, this is actually taking over my life and is causing me to be more anxious and depressed and more alone. And I think young people in my classes right now are figuring out like, I need to be in community more. I need to be connected with people. But then there's also the fear, and this is real. Like, if I get off my phone, I'm going to be communicating less, right? Because that's how they communicate. So, like, what replaces, if you get rid of the phone, what replaces that? And how do you
Yeah.
stay connected? And that's
Yeah.
a real fear that people have. I have a friend, a very good friend. He never got an iPhone. He never got a smartphone. He's always had his flip phone for the last 20 years. And I've looked at him and he still orders taxis. It's very strange. And and I saw him the other night and he's like, yeah, now the world's coming around back to, the way it was for me these last 20 years. I mean,
That's an interesting sociological experiment right there.
yeah, yeah.
Well, Benoit, you're a delight to talk to. I'd love to meet you in person sometime. I am thrilled about this book for you. I think
Thank you.
it's very cool. I think you're wise and humble and, all the things. And I think people will really relate to this book because, whether or not you've been, in prison or you've changed your gender, all of us are struggling between, you know, our actual reality and what we aspire to and what's
Yeah,
realistic in our lives to change and what you can't change. And these
yeah,
questions are sort of like the biggest questions that we ask ourselves.
yeah,
And I think if I pause to think about the patients that I care for at the end of their lives, you know, these questions come out, right? Like, oh, I wish I had done this, or I
yeah,
wish I'd repaired that relationship with my, mother, sister, brother. I
yeah.
wish I had done this. And I think to the extent we can think about these issues before we're dying,
Right.
while we're living, that would be cool. But
And
I
that
don't
was
think we're ever done.
And that was what was so inspiring about some of the older people that I write about in the book who are trying to change late in life. Like, they're like, I want to repair my relationships. There's this part of my personality that's blocking that. And can I fix that? And I just found that incredibly inspiring,
Yeah.
like,
It's never too
yeah,
late.
yeah,
It's never, ever, ever, ever too late.
yeah,
My grandmother was like 94 and she bought a new car. And I was like, damn, that is cool. Like first of all, it was a little denial.
yeah,
She
yeah,
died like 2 years later, but it was also like, I can have a new identity in this,
right,
beat up old car that's new to me.
right.
Anyway, Benoit, it's fun to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks. This was awesome.
I'm excited
Thank
to
you.
hear how the rest of the book tour goes, and I'll probably ping you offline to check on
Cool.
how you're doing with your, screen addiction, and I'll tell you about mine.
Awesome.
Um, all right, talk to you soon. Safe
Thank
travels
you.
back to San
Yeah.
Francisco. Thanks for
Bye.
joining, everybody. Bye.